So is she making brisket for tonight? No. Oh, tonight.
I turned it on high for an hour and it's just not very thick, so I turned it down to low now. It's like
Are you putting vegetables in there?
she didn't say so, so no. I don't know if she's got cabbage. I don't know.
Cabbage. I don't know what I did with mine. I have no idea.
This one's got so many neat maps in the back.
Yeah, mine's got a lot of maps in the back of it too.
Yep. Mine is falling apart.
This is Samuel 16.
The Bible? Really, it isn't that old, is it?
And I've always had it in the case.
Looks like we're gonna have a small group today.
Weather is not what we would like it to be.
Better now than
I
later.
think Deb was gonna be leaving.
That's this, oh, yeah.
I can't remember where she was, if it was Alaska they were going.
Already? I know they're heading to Utah at some point.
Oh, maybe
Utah,
that's it.
maybe that's.
But that wasn't supposed to be till closer to Easter, I think.
Oh,
Unless they're going for a bit. I don't know. She was at Norris last night.
okay.
So
With Beth?
so
I don't know if we're calling Beth anymore or not. We got her new phone number, but I don't know if we're calling her in the morning.
No.
No, we aren't calling her. Cause you can't get a hold of her until after 10 now. Cause she doesn't put in her hearing aids until she gets up, and she doesn't get up until after 10.
hey, there's no sense then, right?
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. That's just fine.
And Beth, and B, you called before 7:30,
Oh, here
because
we
she
go.
leaves her apartment at 7:30. There's Deb, she didn't leave yet.
She's still here.
Good to see you.
Yeah,
See you too.
Hi.
Here comes Rebecca.
your ears must have been ringing, you were talking about it.
Oh, yeah, I haven't left yet, but I am trying out all kinds of art supplies for my trip, and I just want you to know that's ink, you guys. So
You do have
I
big
got
hands.
ordered all kinds of little ink samples, and I'm using a paintbrush with them instead of a pen, and some of them are staining,
Well, as they should.
but I'm having a very good time. So.
Good. Isn't that the point?
My rocks are turning out good. My ground is turning out pretty good, but my skies, I don't know. I'm trying to do skies and snow on the mountain and see what I'm packing. So,
Fair enough.
how are you, Sandy?
Okay.
Who's preaching on Sunday?
Eric.
Eric.
Erica?
Yeah.
Oh,
So we have no idea what's going on.
Mhm.
It's an adventure.
is she gonna do Samuel or no?
Yeah, we're looking at Samuel and we're looking at the gospel today.
No, John.
Erica does a good job.
We'll roll through that. She does. That was great last night,
Oh,
wasn't it?
that's what I told her.
Yeah,
I said,
that was
you're gonna make a good
She's a
pastor. And
she's a good preacher.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And she's already there in almost everything else I mean, she's fun.
It'll be fun to see what she does with this John text on Sunday
How old
too.
is your granddaughter?
They're 14 years old. They, Max, non-gender language. And in this, Erica has been a godsend. Because I work with this and struggle, and for Erica, it seems to be natural. So I feel like I'm following Vicar Erica around, figuring out how do I talk to this person I love more than I can say. So I'm blessed with 3 granddaughters. Well, grandchild, 2 granddaughters. And, you know, I'm in my 70s. It's how do I figure out how to speak and be welcoming like All Saints Lutheran is welcoming. So it's been really helpful for me to learn some of the language. Thanks, though. The welcome that they received last night did so much. You folks cannot, maybe you can, understand. The ride we had home last night when this child felt better about themselves.
Oh, good.
It was wonderful. And I thank you for you. Gosh, thank you.
How old is she?
They're 14 years old, Jerry.
14.
Yeah.
Oh my, she's a grown-up 14, isn't she?
Always has been.
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you after the camera is off. Sorry.
All right.
Are we ready to roll?
Ready to roll?
Ready as I normally
We're
am.
ready
Which
as
is
you
sort of
normally
hopeless.
are. Well, that's just fine. Should we start with 1 Samuel?
However you want to do it.
Let's do it. Let's, 1 Samuel, where are we?
1 Samuel
Today.
16. 1 Samuel 16, 1 through 13. Yeah. The introduction of David in the books of Samuel and the introduction of the kingdom of Israel coming. But I have other things I wanted to say first.
That's shocking to me,
I know.
but feel free.
Please try to get used to it. Folks, did you know that this was among your books? I have no idea where this came from, but Tanner left it out on the table. I picked it up and played with it. And what it does is something I want to talk about today. This is an English version of the Hebrew text. And all the books, let me do this differently. This is the Hebrew Bible in total. Open it up, wonderfully, all Hebrew. The words we have and the stories we have in the Hebrew Bible are identical to the words we have and the stories we have in the English Old Testament. But they're in a different order.
That's so interesting.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. We're agreed on that order. But in the English text, you'll get the book of Ruth next. In the Hebrew Bible, Ruth is back at the end with the writings. We get 1 Samuel and Hannah. Because at the end of Joshua, Judges, almost everything is gone. After creation, after the Exodus, after Moses, after the plagues, after the crossing into the land, Joshua's tribes go out and conquer. Judges' tribes fight against each other and nearly destroy the promise. It's almost gone. The very last verse in Judges is, because there was no king in the land, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And you see the destruction of the promise in the kingdom. Then Ruth, in the English translation, brings Ruth, the Moabitess, someone who's detested, who marries Boaz, becomes the grandmother of David. In the Hebrew text, what you've got, and this is why this thing is so much fun, it's in English, but it's divided up in the way that the Hebrew Bibles are divided up. So let me pass this around. This is a treasure. And I don't know where this came from. If anybody knows the history of this, please let Tanner or me know. Because it was in our shelves, right? You guys
It's just
found
in
it.
our collection.
But it divides the readings of the Torah, the gospel, on Saturdays in synagogue, and then the readings that go with it, the Haftorah, where we would do some of the prophets and the letters.
Cool.
But it's a beautiful thing, and I don't know its history, and there's no name. But I would love to know if anybody knows what the history of this text is. In any event, Ruth gives, obviously Ruth, and then Obed, Jesse, David, through that marriage and alliance. And then in Samuel, we've got Hannah. Remember Hannah, who doesn't have a child and prays to God and goes to the priest and is promised a son, and son is Samuel. And Samuel is the great priest of Israel. And God is supposed to be their king. But the people want a human king, like everybody else, all the nations. So God gives Saul to be their king, And Samuel anoints him and it's wonderful stuff. And Saul disobeys the Lord. And then the Lord tells Samuel that don't grieve this. You're going to go anoint David. And let's start there, because that's where our text starts. This is the introduction of David. This will be the introduction of the kingdom of Israel, the nation of Israel, the promise of the people. This is after Judges. God is now giving them David, and David, through God, is going to bring this back together. So could we start with 1 Samuel 16, verse 1. And Deb, if you've got that, if you would read that for us.
So mine's called Samuel Anoints David, 16 verse 1.
Mhm.
The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. You want me to keep?
Well, okay. For a minute. Go ahead.
But Samuel said, how can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me.
Yeah.
And the Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. We're on 3. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate. Now we're up to 4.
In that case, the king told Ziba, I give you everything.
No.
No,
Wrong chapter.
16.
I am in 16.
Are you in 1 Samuel?
1 Samuel or
Oh,
2?
I'm in 2 Samuel.
Yeah.
You go.
Samuel did what the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, "You've come peaceably?"
He said peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice. And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice.
Okay, let me stop here for a minute. We've already heard a terrible human situation. Now listen to what happens and connect this to things that you've seen in your lives. I mean, this is very relatable to today. So Jerry, would you go?
When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord. Surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord.
Right.
It's kind of double.
He saw Eliab and thought, this very well must be the one that is sanctified to be the next king of Israel.
Okay. Do you want?
Oh, sure.
But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart.
Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one.
Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one.
Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. And so he asked Jesse, are these all of the sons you have? There is still the youngest, Jesse answered, but he is tending to the sheep. Samuel said, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives.
So Jesse sent for him. He was dark and handsome with beautiful eyes. And the Lord said, this is the one, anoint him.
Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. Samuel then set out and went to Ramah.
What in this might apply to something that happens to us? I was shaken after verse 1. Do not keep mourning for Saul. I have rejected him. How many times have we mentored or cared for someone and they've chosen something else? There's not thing one we can do about it. Our hearts are weeping. Do not continue mourning for Saul. I had trouble getting past that very first sentence. But then the rest opened up. There's lots of stuff going on here.
I had the Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart, underlined.
Yeah, that's a theme that you'll see in our Old Testament with the Hebrew Scriptures again and again. But the Lord looks on the heart. Things that we can't see or understand. Exactly.
It's interesting that they emphasize in here that his physical appearance was so important.
Isn't that? Because first it's not, and then the very, don't look apparently, Eliab was a beautiful man. And so was Saul, by the way. Saul was huge and tall and good looking and powerful. He didn't act it all the time. But when he did, he was good. Well, he was.
Sounds like a movie star.
But he was. He first tried to hide from everybody, but when he stepped into his position, he led Israel well. And then he disobeyed God. But he was a good-looking man with Saul. And now Eliab is a good-looking man, and like you said, Deborah, God does not look upon the outward appearance, but on the heart. When has that happened to you? That someone has stood up beyond what they looked like. And it's very odd that the little guy is also very good looking, but he is.
And it sounds like the leader of Ukraine has surprised everybody.
Wow.
Good job.
Sure. The leader of Ukraine, nobody expected anything from, and wow. I mean, remarkable. Go ahead.
I also think we've come through a huge time in history when people weren't looking at women or other groups of people like if this would have gone and said, oh no, I was looking for one of your daughters to anoint, like that would have not gone over. But I'm just saying, you know what I mean? Like sometimes God's path comes in unexpected places.
Mm-hmm. And the women who held up many of our early churches when they were completely looked over. In Jersey, I was asked to do a funeral for a woman who I had visited but was very tentatively related to our congregation. And then I was warned that if I would go into that house, I would be in danger because there was one of her sons was considered terrifying. And God bless the man. He was 7 feet tall or so. And his face was, I don't know what physical condition he had, but it had left him a very large, round head. And he was scary to look at if the generosity and the beauty of the man did not shine through that. It was one of they wanted to sing Ave Maria during the funeral before we closed the lid of the coffin. And so nobody knew how to sing, and it wasn't a problem. I practiced, but it didn't matter. So about 16 of us were surrounding that coffin, and everybody sang Ave Maria at a different time, in a different tune, in a different melody, it was phenomenal. We sang our hearts out, and it didn't matter at all that we didn't know the words, we didn't know the melody. It was one of the most beautiful things I remember. But because of this man's physical appearance, people were afraid to visit. And he was kind of generosity itself. One of the most beautiful men I've ever met. But somebody told me recently that in this generation, Tanner, it's all about appearance. Is that true? How we judge each other, how we look at each other, that appearance is topmost in our society? I don't know that I believe that, but that it's a huge deal.
I don't think I think every generation has their movie stars.
Okay.
And the people that are held up, and that there is a tendency for one generation to accuse the next generation of things.
Thank you.
Repeatedly throughout, now, right? And so
sorry to put you on the spot.
Strive to not and contribute to that.
Right, but I know it matters significantly to my grandchildren, in plural. But God does not look upon the appearance. It's hard not to. Particularly when you see this giant of a man that frightened other people. But they did not know. His heart was out here. I mean, for me, it was hard to miss his heart, but I had to be there. I was just grateful to be there and meet him. But for Samuel to have to say no to Saul, he put everything into Saul. And it was God shone through Saul until the end. Saul did some courageous, phenomenal things. But then it went over to David. And Samuel was in charge of this. Does anything else really strike you about this? I mean, for me, this is a very human. Verse 13, when the Spirit of God is on David. Verse 14, the Spirit of God leaves Saul. This is astonishing, horrific, and sets up the rest of 1 Samuel. In that first book, Samuel is everything. He knows God's word, he talks to God, he anoints as God tells him to, he leads the people, he hollers at them in the 8th chapter because they want a human king, not a divine king, but gives in. God says give in to the people's wish, and that's where we get Saul. Saul does good stuff. And then David. And by the end of that first book of Samuel, Samuel will have died, Saul will have died. In 2 Samuel, David isn't yet king over everything, but within a couple of chapters he is. He's a renegade out in the countryside gathering an army to himself. And by chapter 4 or 5 in 2 Samuel, David is in charge and the headquarters are in Jerusalem because they've won Jerusalem. By the end of 2 Samuel, very first Kings, David dies and Solomon takes over. David is the youngest son. Solomon is certainly not the eldest son. Saul gets wiped out, and in 2 Samuel 7, God tells David that I have chosen you, and when you go to your fathers, i.e. you die, I will establish after you a kingdom, and your heirs will live and be kings forever. I will be his father, one of the heir, and he will be my son. 2 Samuel 7. Setting up not only the kingdom of Israel, but our King Messiah. It's beautifully done. Let's turn to 2 Samuel 7. I don't remember by heart the verse. There it is, verse 12. Tanner, if you get there, would you mind reading verse 12 in 2 Samuel 7? Chapters, 7, verse 12. 13 and half 14.
When your days are fulfilled, and you lie down with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come forth from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. One more of that.
Yes, please.
He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me.
Exactly. It's not just the kingdom of Israel that's being set up here, but that's the anointed one. And anointed in Hebrew is Messiah. Saul is anointed. David is anointed. But this anointed one, his kingdom will be forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be my son. There's a lot of stuff getting set up here. So the first part of 1 Samuel through chapter 15 is the baby Samuel born almost miraculously, and then Samuel giving in to the people's wish to have a human king, then Saul, and starting in 16, verses 1 through 13 is a bridge from Saul to David, and that bridge is critical. So it's really fun that we got this part right here, because the anointing of David is going to set up the kingdom of Israel. It's going to set up the history of the people, which covers most of the rest of the Testaments, the Older Testament, and also the New Testament for us. But the English version is the same through the book of Judges, which is horrific. And then we have Ruth, grandmother to David, And then we have, in the Hebrew text, Hannah and Samuel. Samuel anoints Saul by God's command, and then anoints David. So this is one of those phenomenally important passages in the Old Testament. David sets up the kingdom, and that kingdom goes even further in our understanding. Can I step back to something you said a couple weeks ago? Do you remember when you talked about...
Definitely don't.
No. I remember.
Well, that's good.
You talked about the David's two killings of Goliath. 1 Samuel 17. Something stuck in my head, but I couldn't get it. And I kept thumbing through 1 Samuel. Turns out it was in 2 Samuel. But the books of Samuel are fascinating. They're terrible in the Hebrew Bible. There's bits and chunks and pieces. There's duplicates. There's repetitions. The Greek translation of the Hebrew text we've talked about, the 70, the Septuagint, is much longer in 1 and 2 Samuel than is the Masoretic text, the Hebrew text, the text we read. However, there were the Dead Sea Scrolls. They found Hebrew witnesses that matched the Greek translation that were additions that got left out. And if you're reading along and you see a footnote and it has Q in it, that's for Qumran. That means this is a part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. You should find that at the end of 1 Samuel 10, and I don't want to go into that now. You should have a footnote that says Q, because a big chunk of text was found that explains a political war situation there. But for me, one of the fascinating things of repetition that I couldn't come up with when you were talking, Tanner, but went home and looked it up. 2 Samuel 21, verse 19, then there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob, and Elhanan, son of Oregim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath, the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam, huge. Elhanan killed Goliath, the Gittite. David did in 1 Samuel, Elhanan did in 2 Samuel. The books of Samuel are full of peculiar repetitions and missing pieces. Problematic to our faith? Not at all. But it's really delightful. The Dead Sea Scrolls changed the scholastic world, and they haven't added things to your Bible. They will add text, but you'll see it footnoted. And if you see a Q, it's from something found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So, and they'll name the cave that it was found in. Samuel, but most of the pieces were in cave 4, because you'll see Q4, Sam, and that'll tell you. So, but I love this. Please think about these. I mean, Samuel is almost afraid before God. If I go and anoint David, anoint Messiah, Saul will kill me. This prophet of God is scared. It's not always easy, as you folks know way too well. And it's not always easy to see God's heart. But God is there, mostly in the Older Testament, in the younger sons, the unexpected ones, those on the perimeter, whom God brings forward. And maybe that's one of the reasons I love the Old Testament so much. Because we don't see with God's eyes. God's seeing. I love the description, Nova, of the leader of the Ukraine. Yeah, Zelensky, phenomenal. Anyway, I love the Older Testament, and thank you for playing with me. It's just really fun. Go. Sir.
Good?
Yes,
yeah?
Please.
Thank you so much. We're going to turn now to John chapter 9.
I have to put those away now, right?
What's that?
They don't have the New Testament.
No,
My buddies.
they don't.
They don't.
Oops. There we go, John chapter 9, and we're doing 1 through 41, which is John chapter 9, because that's what we do in Lent, is when John's here, is we read through entire chapters. And so, Deb, would you be willing to start us off with verses 1 through 12?
You want me to read all the way up to 12?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Because it's working out, I got it split into 5 ways. So
Okay, Jesus heals a man born blind. Chapter 9. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with his saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" Some claimed that he was, and others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I am the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they demanded. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash, so I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said.
Thank you. 13 through 17.
Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees, because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus had made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it, so he told them, "He put the mud over my eyes, and then I washed it away. I could see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man Jesus is not from God, for he is working on the Sabbath." Others said, "But how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs?" So there was a deep division of opinion among them. Then the Pharisees again questioned the man who had been blind and demanded, "What's your opinion about this man who healed you?" The man replied, "I think he must be a prophet."
The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that now he sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him."
So the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, I now see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you all also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sin, and you are trying to teach us." And they drove him out.
Through the end.
Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found them, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and you have spoken with him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains."
Thank you.
There's so many things.
There's so many things. Anything that sticks out?
I because I have been in other church faiths, Christian church faiths, like in different times when I've lived places, I'm always interested in how people are interpreting what is like sin, or even when we were in Samuel talking about then like evil spirits were upon him, and how I interpret what disease to be. And so I just always, like, I pay attention to it. I don't think I have any authority on the subject, but I always feel like we got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, so we have sin. So in a way, all illness is from the result of not being in the Garden of Eden, metaphorically for me. And so, like, I just think it's so interesting how they're, like, I think our understanding of what disease is like so different now, and how we should respond to disease. But anyway, that's a conflict for me.
I think that's one of the biggest things for me in this text as well, right? Like in the opening 3 verses right there, it is something that we kind of skip over, but it's something that is so incredibly important because it has such a huge impact on theology and people's understanding of faith and Jesus and God and the church and all of those things. And that is, I'm just going to read those first 3 verses again really quick. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was blind so that God's works might be revealed in him." Okay. The line from the disciples, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind," is, I think, one of the most dangerous, pervasive, and harmful theologies that exists across faith. Not just definitely in Christianity, but across faith traditions. It is one of the most harmful theologies that has ever come out of the concept of faith and God and religion in general. This idea that if you are sick, if you are disabled, if your family members are sick or disabled, if you live in a town that was struck by a hurricane, if your house got knocked over by a tornado,
HIV positive.
if you have HIV, it is because you or somebody that you know, somebody that you're related to, is a dirty, rotten sinner, and this is God punishing you. It is one of the most harmful and yet pervasive theologies that exists across faith traditions, especially in American Christianity. It is one of the most awful things that has ever come out of an interpretation of Scripture. And it's not that it doesn't exist in interpretations of Scripture. It is that it is the most harmful thing, I think, that has ever come out of the Bible. Because it persists in so many places, right? It is, well, those bad Jews, well, those bad disabled people, well, those bad dark people, well, those bad immigrants, well, those bad whatever. Bad things happen to them because God intended bad things to happen to them. And so it is not our job to help them because God intended it to be. Right? That's where it becomes the excuse to not help your neighbor because they must be dealing with this because God meant for it to be.
But the finger is never pointed back.
Oh no, never, right? And it persists into all kinds of things, right? Why did your child die? God needed another little angel, right? That theology, that terrible, terrible line comes directly out of this sort of an idea, right? That bad thing happened because God intended it to be.
And
right?
and parents who are suffering with kids who have different conditions or syndromes, thinking like, like they're, besides the fact that they're having a difficult struggle or a more challenging walk because they're dealing with special needs, which can be exhausting, somehow they're like, what did we do? Somehow we must have caused this. Is this my fault?
Yeah.
Did this come from me or did this come from you? Like, it's like all of that is just like a whole extra bag people carry around that's not helping anything in the situation.
Exactly, because it's not just an externalized thing, it's an internalized thing.
They're
right?
doing it to themselves.
We have
too.
internalized
Yep.
this theology to say this bad thing is happening and what did I do?
Did you smoke while you were pregnant?
Right.
Yeah.
Ah,
What if only, I mean, I didn't know that I was pregnant, but I had a beer with my friend and then the next week I found out that I was
Yep.
pregnant, and is that when this happened? Oh my gosh, I went on a go-kart with my best friend and did that rattle the baby. And did that cause this thing? I mean, that's this internalized guilt and shame is all built into this theology, right? This one line, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And we see it repeated. It's a thread that goes throughout the scriptures, and it's a thread that it's run throughout questions across faith traditions. Why do bad things happen to good people, right? Or why do bad things happen, full stop, right? Why it's the question of evil. It's the question of bad things, and we have to justify it, right? The human condition is having to justify why the bad things happened.
Our brain is, I think part of it's like our brains are searching for cause and effect, because cause and effect helps us learn.
Yeah.
And so what I feel like part of this is, and I'm a teacher, so I'm going to say it with authority, I feel like this is a mislearning of cause and effect.
yes.
Like, because sometimes that's really helpful that we work that way, but sometimes it's really harmful that we work that way, because we're searching and searching and searching for the cause associated to the harm.
It is one of those moments where when we try to apply a across the board black and white cause and effect answer to something, we miss the complexities of the questions. And we miss out on opportunities to learn. Because Jesus' immediate response is, neither this man nor his parents, right? Like, neither this man nor his parents sinned. That is not why this man is blind. But what he does then add is, so that God's works might be revealed in him. Now, you can read that next line and say, God intended this man to be born blind so that 30 years later, God's works might be revealed. Or you can say what you alluded to just a little bit ago, and that is, there are terrible, awful, gross, crap things that happen in the world as a result of the brokenness of humanity, of the brokenness that exists in creation because of the things that we perpetuate. And yet, God works through us. God works through these bad things to make good things out of that, right?
Woohoo! Yeah.
Like that.
It's our opportunity.
It is our opportunity. Exactly.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I think that is so much healthier and so much more edifying and so much more in line with the red thread that runs throughout scriptures. That is, God is constantly giving God's people opportunity to right side up the world.
It's good.
Right? Like that is the promise with Noah and Noah's descendants, right? That they would be a blessing, and to Moses and all of that they would be a blessing to the nations, right? There's this idea throughout the scriptures, this red thread, that God's people exist and God's people have faith, and their faithfulness is to right side up the world, to bring God's goodness back into the world again and again and again, to counteract the bad that exists, right? And we see that in really wonderful and beautiful ways that come out throughout. I mean, one of my favorite concepts that is somewhat odd, but it just exists, is cloistered nuns who, behind giant walls for centuries, have prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. And the entire basis of the theology of that prayer is that the prayer sustains the world, right? That their prayer is a piece of the sustaining of the world. That by sitting here and devoting their lives to prayer, they pull the world back from the brink of annihilation, right? They steadily right side up the world. And that working together with others, we all steadily right side up the world together.
It's a very Jewish philosophy
It's a
as well.
very Jewish philosophy, and it comes out really, really powerfully in this particular text, because the Pharisees come and they say their problem is that Jesus healed on the Sabbath, right? And that is a fair and valid problem, because they raised the question. I'm just going to read this. This is from one of my friends and colleagues that wrote this. They raised the question of the Sabbath because the Sabbath is part of the logic, the logos of the universe, and the logos that holds the cosmos together. They are right to see it this way. The fact that most Christians these days ignore the Sabbath completely, or nearly so, does not make it less significant. It is not so much that the Jewish people have kept the Sabbath. What matters is that the Sabbath has kept the Jewish people.
Nice.
Right? Jesus did not come into the cosmos in the Gospel of John to make the world safe for those who ignore matters of faithfulness. Right? And we carry that as part of our tradition as well. It's not as strong, but we carry that concept of Sabbath is not that we keep Sabbath, but that Sabbath keeps us, right? We don't keep the idea of rest is not because we have to. The idea of rest is because it gives us an opportunity to re-engage with God in a new way, right? Like the concept of not working one day a week is not because we need a break, although we do. It is an opportunity to remember that there is more to life than work, right? It is an opportunity to reimagine what it would look like to have a relationship with God, and to remember that that centers us for the rest of the days. I mean, the concept of Sabbath keeps us more so than we keep it. And that circle is what helps us to re-engage. And that's beautiful Jewish theology right there.
Absolutely. It was explained to me early on when I was going nuts trying to figure out how to be a pastor that the Sabbath is all about God's in charge. You don't run everything. Let go. God's in charge, not you. Just take that off and put it aside. Take a deep breath and sit in the peace of the Lord.
Yep.
And that helped me phenomenally. Not don't sew on the Sabbath, my background.
What Jesus does, though, repeatedly in the Gospels, is comes in on the Sabbath and says, yes, this is very, very important to keep the Sabbath and to be kept by the Sabbath, and also the legalistic way that it has been enforced on people is not healthy. When you get sucked into the Sabbath being rules and regulations, you miss out on the opportunity to engage in God's goodness in this moment. And so for Jesus, healing this man on the Sabbath is not work, right? It is an engagement in the goodness and the mercy of God. And that re-engagement in the goodness and mercy of God is what reinvigorates us and draws us closer to God, which is what Sabbath is all about. And so his argument is always, don't get bogged down in the rules about electricity and about how far you can walk and about whether or not you can give your donkey water and about whether or not your second cousin twice removed is allowed to visit that day. Like, don't get tied into those rules. Recognize the fact that Sabbath is an opportunity to see God's goodness again and again and again, and to live it as well. And so anything that you do to live out the goodness of God, to right side up the world, keeps the Sabbath, just as the Sabbath keeps you. It's good stuff. That's such a fun text in that sense, right?
There's lots more in this text.
There's so much more in this text, though, and it's okay. We have more time. So, another idea or a continuation of idea that anybody sees. I've got a couple more things, but I want to.
So do I, but
I like highlighting whatever you see too. It's more fun. I have a fun fact. Did you have something, Sandy? Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I like the idea that God works through us in spite of us.
It's kind of the point of God.
Right? Yep. It's a wonderful idea.
Fun fact.
So my fun fact about John chapter 9 is that it is divided into roughly 7 sections. We divided it into 5 today. But it contains the longest chunk of the Gospels where Jesus isn't in the story. So you will note that Jesus is very active in the story up through verse 7. And then Jesus disappears. Jesus is mentioned, Jesus is alluded to, Jesus is talked about, but Jesus does not exist in the story again until verse 35. This is the longest stretch of Scripture in the Gospels where Jesus does not exist as a character. Who exists instead is the man who was healed. And the man who was healed bears a striking resemblance to Jesus in a number of ways. He is not believed. He is questioned by the authorities on repeat. He is questioned by the crowds. He is accused of being a sinner. And at one point in time in the middle of this, he uses the phrase, "I am he."
Yep.
Just like Jesus does. We get the great ego emis, the great I am text throughout the Gospel of John. And one of them is here, I am, right? And so you get that, and we're going to come back to that because I love the I ams. But the man who was healed echoes that, right? And so you get this whole chunk in the middle of this passage where you have it's almost as if John is describing what it would be like to be a person of faith when Jesus isn't around. Like, this is a reality, like this reality that exists for the man who was healed is what kind of gets echoed through some of the book of Acts as well. Like, what does it mean to live a life of faith when Jesus isn't physically present in the story anymore? And then it should echo kindly into our lives as well. What does it mean to live a life of faith when Jesus physically isn't present in the moment anymore? Which I think is just like a really, like, most of the time John drives me absolutely bonkers, but like I know that you do. I know you do. But there's a lot of things that you love that drive me absolutely bonkers, so that's not surprising.
That's our individual gifts as
That's
well.
how it is, right? But you get that wonderful section of this where there's so many echoes between John and the healed man, or between Jesus and the healed man, which I think is just kind of fun.
And I want to echo your comment on the authorities, because that's exactly what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
That's another horrible misunderstanding of the gospel. Fred Danker, the greatest of all the Greek dictionary writers, said the Jews is a way of designating the authorities, not the crowd, not the people. Hoyadaoi is a name, a title for the authorities.
Mm-hmm.
So that's who's being contended with, not the crowds, not the people trying to listen, not the ordinary people, but the political authorities who are in charge.
And you will note that even the political and religious authorities of the day are divided, as we see, right?
Yes.
Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided, right? There is not agreement even amongst the authorities about who Jesus is and what should be done about him, which we heard in the story of Nicodemus as well just a few weeks ago, right? Okay, let's talk about I am for a second.
Okay.
Because I love I am, right? So ego eimi, which is the Greek version of the name of God, right, that we hear in Exodus chapter 3, when Moses says, "Hello, bush. Who are you, and why are you sending me on a journey to Egypt?"
Why are you talking to me?
Yeah, that's strange. And the bush says, "I am who I am," right? And it is the state of being, right? So now we have a teacher amongst us. What do you remember? Does anybody here remember the state of being verbs from your English classes?
Is this like to be?
Yeah. Am, is, are, was, were, be, been, be. I had an English teacher. She would do that as a dance. She would do am, is, are, and it stuck in my head in a really horrifying way. So the state of being verbs are am, is, are, was, were, be, been, being, right? And so
And you can
Only-
sing the books of the Bible.
I can
too.
do that, but there are just little things that stick with me, and then vast gaps in my knowledge. All right, so that's just is what it is, right? But each of those fits in. I mean, the whole concept of the state of being verb in the English language is that we can kind of insert it in both to the Hebrew and to the Greek here, right? God is saying, "I am who I am." Jesus is saying, "I am He." Right? It is, "I am who I am." It is, "I was who I was." I am being who I am being. I was who I was. I mean, am is are was were be been being. I are who I are. Right? You know, you get a little Popeye in there too. But the whole idea of that is that it is existence, right? I am. I exist. And so when people say, you know, where did God come from? The answer is God is, right? Like that's the answer. And so Jesus echoes that language throughout John's gospel and pulls that in again and again and again in a way that must just really infuriate some of the Jewish authorities in a way that had to have been kind of hilarious. Like for some of the folks who were following Jesus who had just enough knowledge about what Jesus was doing, it had to have been like really hilarious to see some of the authorities just like pulling their hair out every time Jesus said, "I am." And then leaving it at that. Like that would have been just like this side of heretical, you know, just like maybe we should kill him. Like maybe this is not going to work. Like there are reasons that Jesus, you know, got God. Like there are a lot of reasons for that. He said and did a lot of things that really pissed a lot of people off, and he did it very intentionally and very theatrically most of the time, which is, you know, very very John's Jesus. So.
And jokes around.
And jokes around about it, right?
That's
yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Now, don't we have, I might be off base here, but I think some people might be also interpreting that those who see will become blind is that God has put some kind of blinding thing on the Jewish people so they aren't going to convert to Christianity till God lifts that blinding thing up, and then all of a sudden they're going to see the truth.
Yes, and the only way that they can meet God to have the blinders removed is if we kill them, and then you get the Holocaust.
So there's something about like that there's a belief running around that God on purpose has made Jewish people blind to the truth right now, or some weird thing,
a
right?
Mistaken idea, and then that carries into other folks as well, right? It is the concrete assertion that what I believe about God is right.
Thank you.
And what you believe about God is right as long as you agree with me. And where you don't agree with me, you must be wrong, right? And because you are wrong, it's hardly even your fault because God must have blinded you. And that means, because that's what God does, to teach you a lesson because you've sinned, right? Like,
But it still really has the like, I'm in and you're out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm in and you're out. That's it right there. Yeah. And that's what we see. I mean, that's why it is so common, particularly in modern American Christianity, for there to be so much division, right? There's so much division. I mean, it is so difficult to find common ground amongst even other churches in this community. And we're literally reading the same thing. Like, there's no difference. It's not even like this thing versus that thing, right? It's not even that things are out of a different order. Like, it's the same order. Everything's the same. It's the same it's the same everything. And yet, we've shifted away from one another and view one another. I mean, because the other side is, like, it's easy for us to say, oh, other people do this to us, but we do this to other people, right? Like, we other people as well. I have a big problem with some of the others that are in this community, and I feel like I'm justified in that because what I believe must be right, and what they believe is not, right? And that's just as problematic.
Even within the Lutheran church bodies.
Oh, absolutely.
Particularly.
Even within this Lutheran church, there are varieties of beliefs and understandings, and some of those can live very nicely in harmony together, and some of those become really deeply problematic over time, right?
Yeah.
And
Jules, if hatred is part of your belief, you're doing it wrong. But that's where some of this positivity, I know it's right and you're wrong,
Mm-hmm.
leads to very quickly.
And that is where we get into this idea of orthodoxy and orthopraxy, right? The idea of right belief, orthodoxy, and orthopraxy, right practice. Is this a story about orthodoxy and orthopraxy, or is this a story about just showing up and being part of the community, right? And I think that the argument that Jesus is making is, y'all are getting too tied down in orthodoxy and orthopraxy. Like, the guy was blind and now he's not. Why can't you all just be in community together? Why are you kicking him out of the community? Why can't you all just hang out? And over and over and over again, Jesus just encourages people to just show up and just hang out, like be there and do good things and set up the world together and try your very, very best. Like just that's what we're supposed to do. Knowing that we will fail, knowing that we are all sinners, knowing that we will all fall short, yet knowing that we are all still beloved by God in radical and wonderful ways, and experience God's mercy in radical and wonderful ways, and are then called to love and share that mercy with everybody else.
We have a listening problem. We don't listen. Even though we may not understand or maybe not even agree, it doesn't mean we need to throw it out or attack. Just listen and then work in community.
Yeah, and that can be okay, right?
Yeah.
You can get a lot done when you just decide to work together instead of against each other, right? Like a lot. You can get a lot done, right? a lot done.
As we've experienced here.
Yeah.
I still love the story about being asked if we would be a cold weather shelter, and you just said yes, because you knew the hearts of the people of this congregation.
Just do it.
Wow.
It's not about orthodoxy, it's not about orthopraxy, it's about showing up and doing it, walking the walk of faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
We had a visitor here from Zion last night,
Oh,
Did we?
and he's coming back on Sunday. 'Cause
Cool.
he wants to see
Hopefully.
Sunday service.
Hopefully, yeah.
He said he was.
It should be interesting. Cool.
He's searching
I love it.
because Zion
Everything's-
is no more.
Yeah, things are just different right now, right?
How can they just not?
They're figuring it out. They're figuring it
working
out.
on
They're working on it. Yeah. I know we're out of time, but there's just one more piece of this I think is important to highlight. That's something that we've done really well here today, but that is a part of our language practice that I think is good, and that is theologians who have some sort of a disability often write to everybody and encourage us on Sundays in the weeks leading up to Sundays like this, and how we use our language around the person who was born blind, right? Or any other disability that comes up, right? Saying the blind man is really problematic for a lot of folks who have experienced some sort of blindness, right? Or are going blind or dealing with that. And in general, the preference from that community has been, please talk about him as the man born blind, or the man with blindness, or the man who was healed, as opposed to the blind man. Because often our society attaches a disability to somebody as their defining characteristic, and then that becomes who they are, right? The lame man, the blind man, the deaf man, right, that we hear about, as opposed to this person, the leper, right? The person who has this condition, or the person who is healed from this condition, because that's the other side of this, is that at the end of this, for most of this story, this guy is not blind, right? Like for 4 verses out of 41, this guy is blind, and for the rest of it, he's not. And yet we talk about him as the blind man instead of the healed man, or the man who was blind. And he is referred to as the blind man repeatedly by people who are trying to keep him out, to try to keep ostracizing him from the community. And it is Jesus who says, why is this a problem? Like, you're healed, and it's done, and this is who you are, and that's okay. And so I like to bring that up because as a pastor and a preacher, I often am reminded of that by colleagues who are experiencing a vast variety of illnesses, to be mindful of how we talk about things, because you don't know who in your congregation might be going blind, or have family who is blind, and how we talk about those folks matters, just as how we talk about pronouns and how we discuss who people are matters, and being mindful of that is important, because Jesus was mindful of that, and that's a pretty solid example in general. So.
Here, I have a question for you.
Sure.
Night is coming when no one can work. What are we supposed to be thinking? Like, is that like Jesus dying on the cross and the night is until the Holy Spirit shows up? What is night is coming when no one can work?
The lights are off at night and you're supposed to go to bed.
And I don't know, I'm just like thinking, how long is that night right there? That one.
So I think that John is filled with analogies that we can dig into and rip apart and think about, and that is absolutely one of them. And also sometimes light and dark, right? Sometimes it's really just Jesus saying, like, night is coming and you can't work anymore. And so think about the fact that, like, there are times when we can do things, and there are times when we can't do things. And here is a really good time for you to do something. Even though it's the Sabbath, it's still a good time for you to help people. You know? Because someday you're going to die, and you're not going to be able to help people anymore. And aren't you going to regret not helping all those people? Now, that might not be what he's saying, but, like, in my mind, that's what I extrapolate out of it, right? Like, I think that a lot of it is the built-in understanding here is always that Jesus is encouraging people to do, right? Like, to not sit idly by and let things happen. And that comes out in different places too. It comes out in different places in the sense of, oh gosh, now I lost my train of thought.
The differentiation, like dark, but that's why I love John, because I never get it. I can never answer it. I go back and think about it periodically, especially in a class like this. What does that mean? And I certainly see it differently today than I did 10 years ago, or 20. Kind of like poetry, kind of touches, and you kind of go into, what does that mean? I love John.
I know you do. I know.
Because it can't be answered. I mean, it just goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and there's always more. We didn't even talk about the joke.
No, we didn't talk about the joke. There's all kinds. There's so many things in this.
I mean, it's a huge chapter. It's marvelous.
There's so many things. So. Other bits?